Praise the Lord, brothers and sisters. Welcome to Faith Ministries, where we walk by faith and not by sight. It is Monday, the 21st of August, 2023, and I'd like to welcome you to our second installation of the Life is Spiritual series. So last week, we started off by looking at some divine revelations on the role of a wife in the home, specifically in her marriage. What some of the consequences would be of falling out of alignment with God's plan as far as the woman's role in marriage is concerned, and what we could do about it. So this week, we are going to be looking at the opposite, our counterparts, which would be the husbands. So to be able to address the issue of the husbands, we'll have to start from the very beginning, okay? So we see in the book of Genesis, the story of creation, that God created us in his own image. And specifically in Genesis chapter 2, we see that in verse 8, God created the Garden of Eden. In verse 15, God puts Adam in charge of the garden to tend and to care for it. In verse 20, he brings all the animals and allows Adam, or gives Adam the opportunity or the honor to name all the animals and all the plants. Then in verse 23, around verse 23, we see that Eve is formed from Adam's rib, and Adam actually names Eve, meaning woman, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, for she was taken out of me. So from this we can see that the primary role of the man, okay, and actually at the end of that it's like, for a man shall leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Okay, that's verse 24. So from this story and the chronology of events, there's some things that were actually quite revelatory to me that I would love to share with you. The first being that when God created the Garden of Eden, he put Adam in charge of it, okay? Which would mean that man, as a man being created first and being put in charge of the garden, the expectation is for a man to be able to cultivate. He cultivated the plants in the Garden of Eden. He was in charge of the animals. So for that reason, I think this is probably why most men have this need and this drive. Naturally, they seem to be programmed to be able to want to provide, and also to be able to want to multiply, to create, because we have a creation mandate as well. So as a husband, the primary role and responsibility is for you to cultivate whatever has been assigned to you by God as your responsibility. So you've got a wife. Your responsibility is to cultivate her, because there is no perfect wife out there. And so your job is to cultivate in her the qualities that you wish to see in her. She will have some qualities will not be there, but it's your job to cultivate her. But above and beyond that, importantly, if a man is to leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife, he has that mandate to produce, to till the earth and to produce, which means it's important that as a man, your responsibility as a provider is something that you take very seriously. So you will notice the fact that God put you in charge before Eve came means that Adam was running the show. He was cultivating long before the woman came along. So what that means is that actually before you consider getting married, if you're a single man and you're listening to this, you have to consider whether you're established enough to be able to be in a position to provide for your family. Because the woman that you get and bring as your life partner is not supposed to be the one that takes over your role as the man in terms of providing. She was created as a helpmate, because once Adam had named all these animals and plants and he was tending and cultivating, God said he needs a helper. It's not good for him to be alone. He needs a helper. So the woman comes in to support. Her role is to support. Her role is to help, not to take over and be the man in the home that's doing all the provisions. But it's so crazy because these days we kind of live in a society where there is a subclass of men that simply are very comfortable not wanting to work. They're not sick. They're mentally not disabled. They are young, strong, able-bodied men who are simply comfortable sitting back, folding their hands and letting their wives pretty much do everything. That's not God's mandate for you. In fact, when you do that, you're stepping outside, you're violating that role and that responsibility that God has given you as a man. So if this can only happen for one reason, really, or maybe two. Either you're just lazy or you genuinely have no drive to actually want to do something, to actually want to go out and make something of yourself. Now, I'm not talking about levels of class that you have to be rich, because, you know, the drive and the need to be able to want to produce cuts across socioeconomic status. There are people who are not well off where the men still have that drive to work hard and provide for their family. However much they can afford to provide, they are doing everything they can to provide for their families. So this is not about saying you have to be rich before you get married. You have to be generating X amount of money. It's about you being responsible and mature enough to actually go out there and cultivate. Recognize that you have the responsibility of one day having a family, or if you're married, that you have the responsibility of a wife and children, and you need to take care of these people because you are the head of the home and that is your responsibility. In the Western culture, and I think these days somehow, somewhere, I don't know, there's something that has happened where strong men are being emasculated, and we're seeing a proliferation of weak men who don't want to really put forth their best effort. And I don't know whether it's because, at least in the West, the ratio of women to men is really high. And so for one man, there's so many free women, and maybe men don't feel that they need to exert themselves enough to be able to provide, because, hey, if I have plenty of women to choose from, maybe not much is required of me, and I can just go on to the next woman if this woman's not going to take care of me. I don't know what's going on, but we have now, in the Western society at least, a lot of men are just getting comfortable with women taking care of them, and that's not right. Now, I'm not talking about these situations where you've taken care of things for a while, but maybe you've decided you want to go back to school, or you've lost your job and you're not able to provide for your family, so your wife steps into your role, because when she steps into your role, she's providing for a time until you can get back on your feet. Those are different situations. I'm talking about situations where literally people are in a marriage where the husband is comfortable doing nothing. He's comfortable sitting at home, playing video games, or just plain sitting at home doing nothing while the wife goes to work, and she has to bust her behind working 2 jobs to provide for the family when she has an able-bodied, strong husband who's not willing to pick up the slack and perform his role. So if you're a man and you're listening to this, and this is your situation, you should be concerned. If you love the Lord, you should be concerned, because the behavior that you're displaying is going contrary to what is expected of you as a husband. And this could only be, the root of this could be one of 3 things. One, either you were spoiled, so you grew up surrounded by women who spoiled you, Your mother spoiled you, your aunties spoiled you, and you never really experience any consequences for your poor choices or for your behavior. And so you just grow up feeling entitled to being given things in life, to taking things from women without having that sense of pride as a man that says, hey, I'm a man, I should be the one providing. Anytime as a man you're in a situation where a woman is taking care of you 100% and you don't feel any shame, you don't feel any guilt about that, there is something wrong, because men are genetically, spiritually programmed to actually be providers. So if a woman is taking care of everything about you and you're sitting there like a child and allowing this to happen and not lifting a finger, something is seriously wrong. And I say this with a lot of love. So either you were spoiled, and that's an easy fix, because then as a wife, you need to establish boundaries, and your husband you need to be able to not stop enabling the behavior and allow him to experience the consequences of his poor choices. So that's an easy fix. But the other reasons for this happening are more spiritual. So the second one could be that if you look at the pattern in your family and you notice that all the men in your family, or most men in your family, this is the pattern, that in their marriages they're like the woman, they're taking the supportive role, they are the docile ones, they are being kept. Basically, the women are the ones who are acting like the men and providing, while the men are just sitting back and not really doing much to contribute to the home. If you notice this as a pattern within your family, your larger family, and it seems to have been generational, then it means that perhaps there might be something in your bloodline, maybe a covenant that was made, maybe an altar that is speaking against the destiny of the men in your family, or generational curses might abound, in which case you will need deliverance. The other spiritual issue could also be that perhaps you have within you the spirit of Ahab. Now, Ahab in the Bible was a king, but the spirit of Ahab, and I addressed this in one of my live videos about a month and a half ago. So if you can click on the live and look at, prayers against Ahab and Jezebel, I go into greater detail on the spirit of Ahab. But Ahab, the spirit of Ahab upon a man is one that makes the man passive. He's very immature, especially emotionally, very self-centered, and he pursues pleasure. He wants these, he's pursuing the pleasure principle without really thinking about the responsibilities of being a man. So basically you have a child in a man's body. And typically, Ahab will attract the spirit of Jezebel. So Ahab is constantly looking for a woman that's going to be able to take care of him, that's going to be able to meet his needs and stand, act on his behalf to get things done. He's passive. He's willing to let a woman be more aggressive and take over his role and run the show. This is not how God has ordained you, because you were supposed to be the high priest. You were supposed to be the leader. That's why God made Adam name the animals. That's dominion. You have the power and the authority to name things. You're cultivating long before you get a wife. So anytime you're stepping outside of that, there is an issue. So if the spirit of Ahab is present upon you, then that means also that you would need deliverance from the spirit of Ahab. So it is mandated, really, for man to work. There is no way around it. Even in the book of Acts chapter 28 verse 30, we see that when Apostle Paul, when he was in Rome, he rented a lodging for 2 years where he just, let people come to him and he ministered to them, but he was renting which means he was paying his way for where he lived. So he had to work. And we see and we know for a fact that he was working, and he encouraged men to work and exhorted them not to be busybodies and idle. Because in the book of 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 verses 8 to 12, and I'll read that to you really shortly, it says, "Nor did we eat anyone's bread without paying for it, but with labor and hardship we kept working night and day, so that we would not be a burden to any of you. Not because we do not have the right to this, but in order to offer ourselves as a role model for you, so that you would follow our example." Okay? "For even when we were with you, we used to give you this order: if anyone is not willing to work, then he is not to eat either." So these Christians in the early church were not playing around. They understood the principle. So we couldn't just say, hey, we're waiting for Jesus to come back. Jesus is coming back anytime soon, so let's just chill out here and do nothing and just wait around for him. No. These men, as much as they preached the gospel, they were out there working night and day. If you don't work, you don't eat. So as a man, if you don't work, what gives you the right to think that you still have to make those demands of your wife and expect her to still carry on the role of a wife while she's also carrying on the role of a husband? Then what is your role in the marriage? So God's mandate is for man to work. Now, fortunately, most men have this instinct and the need to provide. But this was a subclass of men that I felt led to be able to address a revelation about this. Because there are men who are like this. And if you're a man like this and you love the Lord is exhorting you and letting you know. You need deliverance if you're seeing these patterns in your family line. If there are no patterns, but this is just who you are, then you need deliverance from the spirit of Ahab. But if it's been established that you were just a spoiled child who has never had to meet any consequences, has always been taken care of by the women in his life, then it's incumbent upon the wife to be able to create boundaries that will enable you to be able to learn how to live in the real world with everybody else. Now, for the other class of husbands who are providing for their families, there's this other revelation that's been given, which is that, of course, in 1 Peter chapter 3, right? Remember we talked about the fact in Ephesians where they said, wives, submit to your husbands as unto the Lord. Men are also called to honor their wives. So 1 Peter 3:7 says, honor your wives. Now, to honor means to regard with great respect. Okay? And so how do you honor your wife? 1 Colossians chapter 3 verse 19 says that men are not to be harsh with their wives. So you speak to her in a manner that is not belittling, dismissive, demeaning, or harsh. Because again, life and death lie in the power of the tongue. And so actually, when you say things that are sharp with your tongue, even when you apologize and all is forgiven, it's very difficult to forget those things sometimes. It's like putting a nail on a wall, or many nails on a wall. When you remove those nails, eventually the holes still remain as a reminder. So sometimes that is why we have to be very careful the way we speak to people, because sometimes the things we say, we will, first of all, never be able to take back. But secondly, even when we've moved past some of those things, the other party that was injured is always going to remember those words that you spoke to them or about them. So how do you honor your wife? Yes, you speak in a way that communicates respect. You don't belittle her, demean her, be dismissive. Way number 2 is to make her a priority, because God has called you guys to be together. So your first allegiance is to God, and priority is to serve God with all that you have. But then you also have to understand that after that, God has put the two of you together and given you a mandate to create, be fruitful, multiply, and subdue the earth. And so there is also a plan that God has for you as a couple to advance the kingdom. God has a plan for each one of us as far as advancing the kingdom and what we can do to advance the kingdom. But when we come together, as when two become one, God also has a plan for the couple to advance the kingdom. And so your wife is your helpmate. She is supposed to work together with you to be able to create. And so you have to make her a priority in your life. And also recognize that as a helpmate, God has given women this instinct that they have, and the foresight that they have, that women literally can see a whole bunch of trouble a mile coming that sometimes men aren't able to see. And so a woman was put in your life as a helpmate to help remedy your blind spots where you can't see because you have tunnel vision. And men generally don't multitask, they just focus on one thing, but women are all over the place, they can multitask. Your wife's job is to kind of like be your eyes and be that instinct telling you, I don't really think this and that, this person's character, I don't think so, because she's designed by nature to be more instinctive, more intuitive. And so she remedies your blind spots, basically. Okay? So understand that this role is this is how you guys work together, basically. She is your helper in that regard and in many other respects. And so when you make your wife a priority, okay, you nurture her. This is how you kind of cultivate her. You nurture her. You pour water into her soul. And when you listen to her, when you are not dismissive of her needs, when you are cooperative with her and you consider her thoughts, then she opens up just like a flower. And she will show you the hidden treasures, believe me, because the depth of a woman is very complicated. And how deep you will go, or how deep you will explore or discover about your wife, will be directly proportional to how loved and protected she feels by you, how honored she feels by you. But if you're making other people a priority, then you're not going to really get as much. You're not watering your flower as much. Which brings me to point number 3, our final point, really. You have to keep other women out of your marriage. Okay? Now, prima facie, you might think I'm talking about, not to cheat, but I don't cheat on my wife. It's more than just cheating on your wife. This ring that you see here, when you get married, they tell you, it's a sign of unending love, a circle has no end, this and that. That's all very romantic stuff. But this ring also represents a boundary. This was a revelation that I had. Think about you and your wife in the middle of this circle. This ring represents a boundary, okay? That should keep out anything that is going to be a threat to your marriage. Okay? So, other women are a threat, and it doesn't necessarily have to mean, of course, blatant dishonoring your wife would be stepping out on the marriage, having an affair with somebody else. But there are other subtle ways that you can disrespect your wife or dishonor your wife, and in so doing, violate the boundary. And it has to do again with women. Why women? Because from the beginning of time, women have been the downfall of man. Eve gave Adam the fruit. Delilah and Samson, Bathsheba and David, Potiphar's wife tried to get Joseph in trouble. And then we have Jezebel and Ahab, to name a few. And so you have to be able to protect your marriage from being infiltrated by other women in ways that are more subtle than literally just having an affair. So, for example, one of those ways would be when you listen to any other woman outside of your wife with respect to how you should run your marriage. That's dishonoring to your wife. This usually happens when you have a situation of a helicopter mom, right? So you have, sometimes moms are generally great, and trust me, their intuition is great. So when a mother doesn't feel like a woman is right for her son, she's usually right. But these are just general concerns of mothers. But there's a certain class of mothers that are completely overbearing. They want to literally go into their sons' homes and run their sons' marriages. They will dictate where the kids go to school. They will dictate where the son and daughter-in-law have to go on vacation. They will have their hand in everything as far as the marriage is concerned. And that's a recipe for disaster for the marriage. So hovering around your son's marriage like a helicopter is dishonoring to the wife, because these decisions, the two shall become one flesh. A man is supposed to leave. Not that the Bible doesn't say a woman leaves her mother and father. It says a man, he leaves his mother and father. A man is mandated to leave mom and dad and cleave to wife. Hold fast to wife. So if you have an overbearing mother who's constantly dictating to you the way your marriage ought to be, you're dishonoring your wife, because you are supposed to be listening to your wife. If you remember in the book of Genesis, and if you don't, you can go back and read it. When Sarai decided she wanted Hagar to leave, Abraham was grieved, because obviously that was his son. Ishmael was his son. He wanted his son to stick around. But God said, listen to your wife. So you're not supposed to be taking pointers on how to run your marriage from your mother. A good mother obviously is going to advise you, and the advice she gives will be for the benefit of the marriage. She's not going to come and cause division. So, advice from parents every so often is fine. But when you have a mother who walks in, she wants to be the one that, is taking over the kitchen, taking over, making decisions for your family. And if every time you have to say something to your wife, you're like, yeah, my mom doesn't think it's a good idea. My mom said we should do this. My mom said we should do this. You're dishonoring your wife, because your wife is supposed to take that role. You and her are supposed to be making those decisions together. So when you do that, you're dishonoring your wife. Now, your wife should be helping you make decisions, but also you should be getting divine instruction from God, because the hierarchical spiritual order is God, Jesus, husband, wife, in terms of spiritual covering. So keep that in mind. The other situation where you can subtly, and I believe me, there are so many marriages that are experiencing a lot of strife because of overbearing mothers. When you decide to put your mother as a priority over your wife, it becomes a problem. When you're more interested in pleasing her and making her happy over your wife, it becomes a problem. When you listen to her counsel and her counsel overrides what your wife advises and what her counsel is, it is going to be a problem. And it is dishonoring and disrespectful to your wife. It's just that plain and simple. The second subtle form of dishonoring your wife would have to be with all the other women. Anytime you prioritize other women out there over your wife, and you may or may not notice it, it's going to be a problem. So always be mindful of the fact that you are a married man. Don't get tempted into going out there and performing husband duties for women who are not your wife. Now, what do I mean by husband duties? I don't mean sleeping with other people. But, if there's this woman who's always calling you, first of all, you have to figure out, why is she always calling me to do these things? Oh, please come help me. My AC unit broke down. I'm having problem with plumbing. Please come help me. And this is just could be a single woman out there, not related to you, but she's constantly calling on you to perform tasks that should be relegated to the man of the house. You are somebody else's wife. That's not your responsibility to go and play husband to another woman out there. Now you might think, oh, I'm just being helpful, I'm just being neighborly. Yeah, if for example, randomly, your neighbor needed help and you helped one time, that's fine. But when you have a woman who is constantly calling on you to do these things, you have to question the motive of that woman in the first place. Because if she knows that you're married and yet she's still constantly calling on you to perform tasks, husband duties, so to speak, for her, that's a woman who, first and foremost, doesn't respect the fact that you're married. 2, she has a blatant disrespect for the sanctity and the holiness of marriage. 3, she has something up her sleeve that's probably trying to get her hooks in you. And you being a man who doesn't really see these things, because men sometimes don't see these things, you think you're helping and you're being kind. But what she's actually doing is undermining your marriage and undermining your wife. And if you continue to go along down this path, you will end up dishonoring. First of all, you will end up dishonoring your wife so far down the line that at some point there might be no recourse. So a dishonored wife is a disenfranchised wife. Okay? So be mindful, because there are games that women play that men are not aware of. And when a woman has her hooks in you and she has her sights in you, those are the manipulative things she's going to start to do. So be on the lookout and understand that your marriage is paramount. And keep such silly women out of your marriage. Because when your wife is disenfranchised, you're not going to get the best out of your wife. Proverbs 31 tells us about the wife, right? The Proverbs 31 wife. It's very popular. She's more precious than jewels. She's hardworking and enterprising. She's generous. She takes excellent care of her home. She plans and saves for the future. So if you truly want to have a marriage where you cultivate these qualities in your wife, you can't go dishonoring her by prioritizing other women. You can't go dishonoring her by performing husband duties for that single woman out there, or even married woman out there, who is constantly calling you and pretending to be a damsel in distress. Because, that strokes men's egos and makes them feel needed. And they know that. Because that is a trap right there being laid for you to destroy your marriage. So be wise. Be wise as a serpent, but harmless as a dove. And stay away from such women, because they will destroy your marriage. Okay? So, what are the consequences of dishonoring your wife? Because it does come with consequences. And as we've seen, you don't have to go out and physically sleep with another woman to dishonor your wife. You can do it in all these subtle ways that we just talked about in this video. So, marriage comes with blessings. The Bible says that he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. Okay? Ecclesiastes 4:9 also tells us that when, two are better than one, and you're able to get a good return on your labor. And so, when you dishonor your wife, the most severe consequence that there is that the heavens are going to close above you, and you will not hear from God. God will not hear your prayers. The book of Malachi 2:13-15 tells us that. And also 1 Peter 3:7 says that if you don't treat your wife well, your prayers are going to go unanswered. Now you tell me, brother, if as the high priest of your home, you are to receive divine instruction from God on how to lead your family, how are you going to do that if the heavens above you close and you're not able to hear from God? It means you're not going to be able to get the instruction that you need that is specific to your family from God, which is further going to inhibit your ability to lead your family. And that's terrible, because without a vision, a people perish. And without a divine vision from God, once you start to rely on your own intellect and your own understanding, the Lord will not direct your path. You're going to make so many mistakes and lead your family down the wrong path. And once the head is rotten, which is you, the whole body is rotten. So it's incumbent upon you to make sure that you're constantly aligned with the will of God, so that you have a direct line to God and can hear Him lead you and guide you as far as what you need to be doing to position your family to receive from God and to have a marriage that thrives and that is pleasing to God. So, with that, I want to encourage you to be on the lookout. I want to encourage you to strive to be better, so that the Lord will answer your prayers and you'll be able to lead your family in the way that He specifically has ordained. I hope this message has blessed you, and I pray that the Holy Spirit convicts you, and that if you need deliverance, please get the deliverance that you need to put you in a better position to be the man that God has called you to be for your wife and for your family. God bless you, and I'll see you next week in another video. Shalom.